The National Electrical Code does not explicitly mandate the use of in-use covers, often referred to as bubble covers, for GFCI receptacles that serve air conditioning unit service plugs. However, several NEC requirements pertain to the installation and protection of outdoor receptacles, including those used for air conditioning equipment. NEC Article 406.9 states that GFCI protection is required for all 125V through 250V receptacles installed in outdoor locations. This requirement applies to receptacles within 6 feet of grade level, meaning the ground. Also, those receptacles that are not part of a permanent building or structure must have GFCI protection. So, if an air conditioning unit receptacle falls within this category, GFCI protection is a must. If the air conditioning unit comes from the factory with a pre-installed weatherproof cover, the necessity of replacing it with an in-use cover depends on whether the factory-provided cover meets certain requirements. NEC Article 404.14 covers the requirements for switches and receptacles in damp or wet locations. If the factory-installed weatherproof cover complies with this article, it is generally acceptable to use it instead of an in-use cover. However, there is another consideration. NEC Article 406.9c2 addresses covers for GFCI receptacles installed in wet or damp locations. This section stipulates that the cover must be able to be locked in a closed position. This is to prevent unauthorized access or tampering with the GFCI device. The lockable feature can be achieved with a separate in-use cover or an integrated cover that locks the GFCI reset button. If the factory-installed cover does not provide a locking mechanism, it might be necessary to install an in-use cover that provides this feature. So, to summarize the requirements, firstly, GFCI protection is required for outdoor receptacles serving AC units, especially those within 6 feet of the ground. Secondly, a factory-provided weatherproof cover that complies with NEC Article 404.14 is generally acceptable. Thirdly, the cover must be lockable, as per NEC Article 406.9c2, either via an in-use cover or an integrated locking mechanism. Even if the NEC does not explicitly require an in-use cover, it is always a good practice to assess the specific installation environment. If the factory-provided cover is susceptible to damage or if it does not offer adequate protection from the elements, an in-use cover might be a prudent choice. Also, local codes and ordinances can sometimes be more stringent than the NEC. Some jurisdictions might specifically require in-use covers for all outdoor GFCI receptacles or for those in specific applications. It is important to consult with the local authority having jurisdiction, often the city or county's building department, to determine if there are any additional requirements beyond the NEC. Let's delve deeper into the specific NEC articles that govern the installation of outdoor receptacles and GFCI protection. NEC Article 406 covers receptacles, cord connectors, and attachment plugs, including requirements for their installation in various environments. Within this article, Section 406.9 specifically addresses receptacles in damp or wet locations. This section is crucial for understanding the requirements for outdoor receptacles, including those used for air conditioning units. Subsection 406.9 mandates GFCI protection for 125V through 250V receptacles installed in outdoor locations and readily accessible to the public. The term readily accessible generally means that the receptacle can be accessed without the use of tools or climbing over obstacles. This requirement ensures that anyone using the receptacle is protected from electrical shock hazards, especially in wet or damp conditions. Subsection 406.9b further clarifies the requirements for weatherproof enclosures. It states that receptacles installed in wet locations must have an enclosure that is weatherproof, whether or not the attachment plug is inserted. This means that the receptacle must be protected from rain, snow, and other forms of moisture, even when a cord is plugged into it. Subsection 406.9c provides additional details on the types of covers required for receptacles in wet locations. As mentioned earlier, it mandates that the cover be able to be locked in the closed position to prevent tampering. This requirement is particularly important for GFCI receptacles, as unauthorized tampering could compromise the GFCI protection and create a safety hazard. Now let's consider the factory-provided weatherproof cover in more detail. If the air conditioning unit is supplied with a cover that meets the requirements of NEC Article 404.14, it is generally acceptable for use. NEC Article 404.14 addresses switches and receptacles in damp or wet locations and specifies the types of enclosures and covers that are suitable for these environments. To comply with NEC Article 404.14, the factory-provided cover must be designed and constructed to prevent water from entering the receptacle enclosure. It must be made of a durable material that is resistant to corrosion and weathering. A cover must also fit tightly against the receptacle to create a watertight seal. If the factory-provided cover meets these requirements, it is not necessary to replace it with an in-use cover, unless the local jurisdiction has specific requirements to the contrary. However, it is important to inspect the cover regularly to ensure that it remains in good condition. Over time, the cover can become damaged or deteriorated due to exposure to the elements. If the cover is cracked, broken, or no longer provides a watertight seal, it should be replaced immediately. In such cases, an in-use cover might be the best option, as it provides a robust and reliable form of protection. An in-use cover is specifically designed to protect receptacles from moisture and other environmental hazards while a coat is plugged into the receptacle. It typically consists of a hinged cover that encloses the receptacle and plug, creating a watertight seal. In-use covers are available in various sizes and configurations to accommodate different types of plugs and receptacles. They are also available with different locking mechanisms to prevent tampering. When selecting an in-use cover, it is important to choose one that is rated for outdoor use and that is compatible with the receptacle and plug being used. The cover should also be easy to install and operate. In addition to the NEC requirements, there are several other factors to consider when choosing a receptacle cover for an air conditioning unit. These factors include the location of the receptacle, the type of air conditioning unit, and the local climate. If the receptacle is located in an area that is prone to flooding or heavy rainfall, it is especially important to choose a cover that provides a high degree of protection from moisture. If the air conditioning unit is a high voltage unit, it is important to choose a cover that is rated for the appropriate voltage. In areas with extreme temperatures, it is important to choose a cover that is made of a material that is resistant to cracking or fading. Let's discuss some common scenarios and how the NEC requirements might apply. Imagine a scenario where an air conditioning unit is installed on the side of a house, with the receptacle located about 2 feet above the ground. In this case, GFCI protection would be required, as the receptacle is within 6 feet of grade level. If the unit is supplied with a factory-installed weatherproof cover that meets the requirements of NEC Article 404.14 and includes a locking mechanism, it would be acceptable to use that cover. However, if the factory-provided cover does not have a locking mechanism, an in-use cover would be required to comply with NEC Article 406.9c2. Now consider a different scenario where the air conditioning unit is installed on a rooftop, with the receptacle located several feet above the roof surface. In this case, GFCI protection might not be required, as the receptacle is not readily accessible to the public. However, it is still important to provide a weatherproof enclosure for the receptacle to protect it from the elements. In this situation, a standard weatherproof cover might be sufficient, as long as it meets the requirements of NEC Article 404.14. Another scenario involves a portable air conditioning unit that is plugged into an outdoor receptacle. In this case, GFCI protection is definitely required, as the receptacle is readily accessible and likely within 6 feet of grade level. An in-use cover would also be recommended to protect the receptacle and plug from moisture, especially if the unit is used in wet or damp conditions. Remember that the interpretation and enforcement of the NEC can vary depending on the local jurisdiction. It is always a good idea to consult with a qualified electrician or the local building department to ensure that the installation meets all applicable codes and regulations. In addition to the NEC and local codes, there may be other standards or guidelines that apply to the installation of air conditioning units and receptacles. For example, the manufacturer of the air conditioning unit might have specific recommendations for the type of receptacle cover to use. These recommendations should be followed carefully to ensure that the unit is installed safely and correctly. Another important consideration is the proper grounding of the air conditioning unit. Grounding helps to protect against electrical shock hazards by providing a path for fault current to flow back to the source. The NEC requires that all electrical equipment be properly grounded, including air conditioning unit. The grounding conductor should be connected to the grounding electrode system of the building. In summary, while the NEC does not explicitly require in-use covers for GFCI receptacles serving air conditioning units, several factors must be considered. These factors include the location of the receptacle, the type of factory-provided cover, the presence of a locking mechanism, and any local codes or ordinances. It is always a good idea to consult with a qualified electrician or the local building department to ensure that the installation meets all applicable requirements and that the air conditioning unit is installed safely and correctly. Remember that electrical safety is paramount, and it is essential to take all necessary precautions to protect against electrical shock hazards. By following the NEC requirements and consulting with qualified professionals, you can ensure that your air conditioning unit is installed safely and that the receptacle is properly protected from the elements. In addition to the technical aspects, it is also important to consider the aesthetic appearance of the receptacle cover. While functionality is the primary concern, it is also desirable to choose a cover that blends in with the surroundings and does not detract from the overall appearance of the building. In-use covers are available in various colors and styles, so it is possible to find one that is both functional and aesthetically pleasing. Another practical tip is to label the receptacle cover clearly. The label should indicate the voltage and amperage of the receptacle, as well as any other relevant information. This can help to prevent accidental overloading of the circuit and ensure that the receptacle is used safely. Finally, it is important to maintain the receptacle cover properly. Regularly inspect the cover for damage and replace it if necessary. Keep the cover clean and free of debris to ensure that it functions properly. By following these simple tips, you can ensure that your receptacle cover provides years of reliable service.